Well, someone who certainly knows a thing or two about impeachment is Ken Starr. He was the independent counsel whose investigation in the 1990s led to the impeachment of President Bill Clinton. Ken Starr is also a Fox News contributor, and he joins us now from Houston. Ken Starr, thank you very much indeed.
My pleasure.
You're the only living person who's led an investigation that's led directly to the impeachment of a sitting president. From what you've seen so far of the evidence that's being assembled against President Trump by the House of Representatives, do you think what you've seen rises to the level of impeachment?
I don't. It's ultimately a judgment call for the House of Representatives, but given what we've seen, I think the president did not exercise good judgment in that call. I don't think he's exercising good judgment now. But guess what? That's why we have electoral contests. That's why we have nominations and debates. And then finally, in 13 months, we go to the polls. And that's the referendum on the president. We learned that in the Clinton years. Wait for the referendum on the president. Don't go to impeachment.
You say that yes, exactly. You'd have to have something sort of firmer. What would it take? I'm wondering if a president uses his office to advance his political prospects in an election by enlisting the support of a foreign government to obtain information about one of his opponents. Would that not represent an abuse of power?
Oh, yes. I'm not saying that would not constitute something that people would say that's impeachable. Certainly, it's reasonable to say you're taking advantage of, or let's go ahead and use the abuse term, your abuse of power. But what we know from our history is that impeachment and removal from office, that ultimate, call it capital punishment, has to be reserved and has been reserved for the most severe kinds of offenses. So this just, to me, my judgment call. Others are obviously having different judgment calls. This just does not rise to the level of treason, bribery, and other high crimes and misdemeanors. And we know, Jerry, from the Clinton investigation, the impeachment drama, that you can commit felonies against the rule of law. You can lie under oath to a federal grand jury. You can obstruct justice. And the American people said, look, we don't approve of that, but we do not want to remove the president from office.
Would there be, so you're saying pretty well, as far as I can understand it, that there's just not, that even if the president did what he's accused of, it's not clear, it doesn't rise to the level of an impeachable offence. That is, if he got a foreign government to help in his election, you don't think that would, I know it's a political process and ultimately it's a political judgment,
right,
but you don't think, given your experience, you pursued President Clinton obviously for perjury and obstruction of justice particularly, but you don't think that what President Trump is accused of would be in any way comparable to what President Clinton was?
No, because I don't think under these circumstances that there is any, others will have a different view, definable crime, and especially a pattern of felonies in obstruction of justice during the Clinton years. And again, the American people said, we want stability. I think impeachment with respect to the President of the United States has become, shall I say, it's atavistic. We don't need it anymore, except, again, for the most severe kinds of situations. And now the President of the United States, wisely or no, is broadcasting, hey, I want China to help. I think this is, again, it's a question of judgment, but not let's remove him from office. That's a vote of no confidence. Do
you think actually maybe the impeachment clause, the impeachment process has fallen really into disuse? As you say, you, I think, clearly demonstrated to most people's satisfaction that President Clinton did lie and did perjure himself and maybe did obstruct justice. And yet the Senate wouldn't convict him. In fact, the Senate didn't come anywhere close to convicting him. Some people say this president has abused his power, obviously not feloniously, but has committed a serious abuse of office. I don't know anybody who really thinks that he's going to be removed from office. Isn't it ultimately then really just up to the people to decide an election?
Exactly right. And for the people to decide on impeachment and removal. And the American people, I think, have in fact set a very high bar. You know, they haven't said, okay, this is the standard in some legalistic sense. But you're right, I think, in saying that perhaps impeachment with respect to executive officers Let's come back to judges if we have time. But just as in the mother country, there has been no serious use of impeachment in over 2 centuries. Why? Because there are other checks and balances. And we're seeing those checks and balances at work. We now know what the president is doing. We have whistleblowers. We have oversight committees. Let's not bring this to impeachment and bring all the act.
We don't have a lot of time, Ken, but just so very quickly, final question.
Sorry.
But if the president, under Justice Department guidelines, and everybody seems to understand, can't be indicted for crimes, and we seem to be getting to the point where he can't be impeachable, doesn't it actually mean that somewhere along the line he's above the law?
Oh, no. He can't be under the Department of Justice guidelines, Jerry, be indicted while he's in office. But President Clinton faced that, and that's why on his very last full day in office, President Clinton entered, as it were, a settlement agreement with the prosecutor, with the independent counsel. Didn't get a lot of attention because we had a new president coming in. But he settled the case to avoid what? Criminal indictment. So the president of the United States, as soon as he leaves office, and the clause in the Constitution is absolutely clear on this, cannot escape the justice system just because of impeachment.
My thanks to Ken Starr. Just ahead,